Hello and welcome to EDHREC's Upping the Average, where we take a commander's average decklist as compiled by the data on EDHREC and make some quick swaps to it to take it from being a good start to a great one. This week, you are cordially invited to an archaeological marvel. Welcome to Jurassic Park. Gishath's son's avatar is an 8-mana dinosaur avatar with Trample, Vigilance, Haste, 7 Power, and 6 Toughness. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we reveal that many cards from the top of our library and put any dinosaurs among them onto the battlefield, the rest going to the bottom. We've got Raptors, T-Rex, Triceratops, Brontodons, Pterodactyls, every type of dino you can imagine. Alright, let's load Gishath's average decklist into the ArcDeck deck-building website. And remember, all of our swaps must either keep the price of the deck cost neutral or help lower the overall price of the list. This is your tour guide speaking. On your immediate left, you'll see a number of splendid terrains, vistas, and lands through which our animals may roam. We also have a variety of flora from which our herbivores may sustain themselves. If you have any questions about specific creatures, our zoologist, Huatley, will be happy to help, and please remember to stop by our gift shop to pick up some memorabilia after your trip. Oh, and of course, on our right, we'll see a whole bunch of dinosaurs! As usual, I've got 3 categories to tackle to help improve this average deck list. We've got the typical category, budget, one that I'm also calling tribal gone bad, and finally, I'd like to tackle our Dino Density. There are a lot of cards in this list that cost a lot of money, which means I think that there's a spared no expense joke in here to be had somewhere, but at the end of the day, we're just not all as rich as John Hammond. There are 5 cards that immediately jump out to me as being too expensive if you're building this deck for the first time. And the first is Zakama Primal Calamity. When did this thing get so darn pricey? It's great, believe me, but we don't need to pay this much money for one dino. It also doesn't trigger off of Gishath's ability, which isn't really a reason not to run it, but which does make me feel less bad about cutting it. We'll be okay without the big pricey dino. Gishath floods the field with lots of prehistoric creatures, so individual titans can take a back seat until you feel comfortable with your base foundations first. Next is Mirari's Wake. Let's be clear, this card is sick. While a lot of tribal decks out there have very low-cost creatures, like merfolk or goblins or elves, dinos cost a lot of mana. That's what makes Gishath's ability to cheat them into play so awesome. We need a lot of ramp not only to cast Gishath, but to cast our other dinos in the first place too. This card is great, but green is also really good at giving us more budget ramp effects. Green is also good at card draw, which is why these next 2 expensive cards draw my eye. Vanquish's Banner and the Great Henge. These are pricey, amazing, but pricey. And really, it's perfectly fine if we run a Harmonize here instead. I have some other replacement recommendations too, but before making them, I think it's important to reflect on how Gishath wants to draw cards. Tribal decks sometimes enjoy upfront card draw rather than board-dependent card draw. If we're drawing cards when we have a big board, that's great, but in that case, we're also already doing well. This is why I don't particularly enjoy Colossal Majesty in this list, which requires us to have a board presence to get the payoff. A board-dependent draw effect can be a dud if our board becomes empty, and the nature of Gishath's play pattern suggests that we may well end up with some very empty boards indeed. We ramp up, play a creature or 2, come out swinging with Gishath, put more dinos into play, and next turn we'd be hitting for so much damage that every single opponent is likely to fire off a board wipe as soon as they can to set us back to square one. That's why consistent draw effects, which resupply you right away, are so popular and important for this type of deck. We can't guarantee that we'll keep our big board very often, so our draw should be sculpted to reward us for playing the creatures, not just having creatures. That's why I like Harmonize, because it doesn't care if we have a creature on board, but also Guardian Project and Lifecrafter's Bestiary, to help keep things supplied without depending on our board and without completely breaking the bank the way that the Great Henge does. Now, Rishkar's Expertise is a famously good card, and worth it even if it does depend on us having a creature on board. But it's climbing up there in the dollars, and I promise to keep prices lower, and really, I don't think Guardian Project is even all that cheap anymore, so I'd actually like to take this time to highlight another card around that price threshold instead, because I think this deck really, really ought to use it. Lurking Predators is like a green Mind's Dilation. Kinda. Whatever. It cheats costs and can put our huge dinos into play for free. This thing's awesome. Piggybacking off our observations on Gishath's play pattern, the last card I'm cutting because of budget is Heroic Intervention. One of the best green cards out there. Believe me, I love this thing. And protecting Gishath and his board is priority number 1. If budget were not a concern, I'd keep this and frankly add in the new card Flawless Maneuver as well. As it stands now, though, I'm putting in the great cheaper ones like Make a Stand and Unbreakable Formation. We gotta keep the dino board protected, and there are much cheaper ways to do it. If Gishath gets to swing even twice, our opponents are in for a world of hurt on a very short clock. Feel free to upgrade these options as time allows, but paying attention to Gishath's play pattern and the requirements of his draw and protection options helps us find great cards to supplement those areas, and that makes me comfortable with these swaps. And for us to move on to our next section, which I'm calling Tribal Gone Bad. So there's this phenomenon in Magic where sometimes cards come out that reference specific mechanics or card types or creature types or what have you, and that makes us want to play them when we are building around that mechanic or creature type. But sometimes, even in their best case scenario, those cards are still not as good as just the regular old classics. And that's what I want to try and tackle here. The biggest example for me here is Thunderherd Migration. We will not always have a dino for this effect, but even when we do, it's just a rampant growth. There are a bunch of other 2-mana ramp options out there, and we should run them before the Thunderherd. Commune with Dinosaurs doesn't make the cut either. This is a tiny cantrip, and while it's unlikely to whiff, necessarily, it's also unlikely to get us what we need. It's too small of an effect to devote a card slot to, and there's a good reason that other green sorceries with this type of ability barely show up in even 1,000 decks. Savage Stomp is also very lackluster. It's like a slightly better Prey Upon. I'm swapping this straight across for Chaos Warp. Get them while they're cheap. In fact, where are the board wipes? We've got almost nothing to help clear the board in case we fall behind. The best example is maybe Pyrohemia, and even that's really more of an Enrage enabler. In that vein, I'm throwing Blasphemous Act and Chain Reaction in here, because they can clear the board and or trigger Enrage. Plus, if we have a Temple Altasaur in play when we cast either of these, that's basically a cheap Plague Wind right there. Now, on the flip side of this, sometimes the classic cards aren't good anymore either. Explosive Vegetation has several strictly better versions of itself. I'm going to add the new Migration Path here as a replacement. Our final cut in this section is Huatli. Sorry, love, but the only ability of yours that I even like is the middle one that makes 3/3s, and that's not worth 5 mana. If the reason you want to play any or all of these cards is because of their rad dino flavor, then that is an absolutely perfect reason to continue playing them. But if the goal is to upgrade the deck, then these are the cards that we have to acknowledge do kind of hold us back. Alrighty, time for round 3, Dino Density. So this will probably be a strange one. I expect I might get a bit of pushback about it, to be honest, but the longer I've looked at this average deck list, the more I felt that this is the right call to make when upgrading the deck. A tribal deck like this needs a high density of creatures of the right type to properly acquire their tribal synergies. We've got that. There are only 6 creatures in the deck that are not dinosaurs, and they're all here to help cast those dinosaurs. That means we have a roughly 28 dinos that we can hit off of Gishath's damage trigger. With hypergeometric calculations, assuming Gishath does the full amount of damage, there's usually around a 30% chance that we get 2 dinos from his trigger and like a 27% chance that we get 3. Those are just rough numbers though. What I want to do is increase those numbers for 2 reasons. First, to increase those odds, and second, I think it would be really easy for this deck to have a companion. Y'all know the one. Kahira the Orphan Guard can start outside the game as long as every creature in our deck, including our commander, is one of 5 different creature types. For us, that's dinosaurs, and Kahira will give every dino a tiny buff. Note that Wizards of the Coast has errated all 10 companions to do something completely different than what their text reads. Instead of casting directly from outside the game, you now have to pay 3 mana, only at any time you could cast a sorcery, to put it into your hand as a special action. The entire mechanic had to be redone with an additional tax of 3 mana because of the effect these cards had on every single constructed format. It's almost as though starting every game of competitive level Magic with a free extra card outside the game that requires very little extra deck restriction for your deck to obtain and which creates homogeneous states of gameplay was not the most balanced mechanic they've ever designed. Sorry, I just realized I'm high in the frame. Let me get off the soapbox. Companions in Commander are not the behemoth they've been for other formats. I've personally built 2 decks with companions, Rune with Karuga, and Graven plus Obosh. And even despite the rules change, I've still been pretty happy with the results in EDH. Now, I'm not here to be a companion evangelist. This is likely one of the few upping the average videos where I'll specifically recommend adding a companion. The reason I'm doing it here is because, well, it's just so dang easy to do. When I built those other 2 decks, they required me to cut like 14 cards from Rune and 32 cards from Graven. How many does the Gishath deck have to cut to obtain Kahira? 6. Just 6. These 6. Just 6 out of 100? Y'all, that's practically free. I don't want to just plow forward yet, though. I really want to make the case that this is worth it and take a look at what we'd be giving up to get Kahira. These creatures are all Ixalan humans that help assist our dinosaurs, particularly by helping us cast them. So, point 1, these aren't dinos that can be flipped into play off of Gishath. I wouldn't go as far as saying they get in the way of Gishath's ability, not at all, but it's not like we're missing out on putting free creatures into play either. Point 2, I'm inclined to cut some of these humans from the deck anyway. A lot of them reduce the cost of dinos, and only dinos. Kinjali's Collar, for example, helps reduce the cost of 28 cards in the deck, but a regular old mana dork could help give us mana for all the cards in the deck. I'm just routinely unimpressed by the numbers on cost reducers. Point 3, and this is the big one, these are easily replaceable. These humans are mostly ramp effects. Green is thriving with ramp effects that we could use instead. We have tons and tons and tons to choose from. It's just such a minimal sacrifice to start the game with a free 9th card. There are only 2 humans here that I think we really genuinely miss. EDHREC Seer is ramp and can retrieve a card from the yard. But again, green has great spells with that ability if we want to replace that effect. The true biggest loss, I think, would be Forerunner of the Empire, who tutors a dinosaur and helps repeatedly proc and rage effects, including a tiny combo with Polyraptor. But even then, these effects are easy to replace. EDHREC Seer, meet your successor, Naya Charm, which needs to be played in more Dia decks everywhere because this thing is a house. It gets stuff back from the yard, it picks off utility creatures, or it triggers Enrage, it prevents an enemy from attacking you, it taps an enemy army to make them easier to hit. This thing is bonkers good, play it, play it, play it, play it. Meanwhile, Forerunner is a tutor effect, which, well, if we cared about tutors, here's a small list of some creature searchers in this color combo. Now, Forerunner's Enrage enabling is something we'll definitely miss, but keep in mind there are lots of games we won't even see this card. So are these cards that we might not see every game worth sacrificing so that we can have what is effectively a 6 mana small pump for all of our dinos? Well, Thundering Spineback is a 7 mana pump effect in the deck already, with an activated ability that is 6 mana for a 3-power creature. So yeah, going by the deck, I personally think that rate is fine. We don't need to zoom right to Kahira every single game, but Gishath is expensive, and it's kinda cool to have something to do before he hits play, which also pumps him and gives him an extra card to look at from his damage trigger. Plus, Kahira isn't the only benefit, because this actually frees up some room to put in more dinosaurs. Companion isn't the only errata running around out there. Regal Behemoth has been updated to be a dinosaur too, and it definitely belongs in this list. And Rampaging Bronzodon is a promo card or something from I don't even know where, but it hits really hard and it definitely needs to show up in more of these decks. Okay, so I've been doing this like Jurassic Park theming as a silly joke for the video, but it just occurred to me while recording that I've kind of accidentally written the plot of the movie into the deck because I've taken all the humans out, and like, it's just, I don't know, y'all, like, life finds a way. It would be deeply irresponsible, though, to just replace these humans with big dinos. The humans filled the role of ramp, so let's make sure we get some ramp in their stead. Skyshroud Claim, for example, is great for those dual-typed lands. I could go all in on cards like Nature's Lore and Chromatic Lantern too, but to honor the low price and the low mana cost of the humans, I opted for Talismans, because they're really cheap on mana and they're, like, barely even $1. Almost done, but I feel like there's something missing. Yes, real quick, the lands. Screw the Temple of the False God, we should have a Ghost Quarter or a Tech Edge in here. If someone has a Maze of Ith across the field, we need a way to make sure that Gishath can still attack successfully. Also, if we have some of those dual-typed lands, Krosan Verge would be lovely here. And lastly, it might seem a little weird that I'm adding in Guild Gates, but I want to do right by that circuitous route in the main board. So after a little sprucing up the habitats, here is our new and improved park. The link to the list can be found in the description below with the cuts in the maybe board. I hope you've enjoyed this trip through the prehistoric era, and if you have any specific recommendations for your fellow tourists about your favorite upgrades for Gishath, make sure you leave them in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching.